Hey, let me ask you something. When you hear the words Islam and Christianity, what pops into your mind? Conflict? Division? Maybe even fear? Let's flip that. Because today we're cutting through the noise. Let's talk about what Islam actually says about Christians. Because once you know the truth, the real historical, textual truth, you can't unsee it. And it might just change how you see the world. Let me walk you through something most people have no clue about. In Islam, Christians aren't treated like outsiders or enemies. They're not dismissed, dehumanized, or erased from the conversation. In fact, they're given a title that carries deep respect, Ahl al-Kitab, or people of the book. Now let me explain what that means, because it's not just religious jargon, it's foundational. In the Quran, people of the book refers to those who received earlier revelations before the Prophet Muhammad, primarily Jews and Christians. It means that God recognizes that these communities were part of the divine story, that they were entrusted with scripture, that they were chosen to carry messages of guidance for humanity. That alone should stop us in our tracks. Because it means Islam doesn't see itself in a vacuum. It sees itself as a continuation of something bigger, a shared legacy of faith. Now this isn't just symbolic. It shows up in how Muslims are taught to speak to Christians. The Quran says in chapter 29 verse 46, "Do not argue with the people of the book unless in the best and most gracious manner, except with those among them who do wrong, and say, we believe in what was revealed to us and revealed to you. Our God and your God is one, and to him we submit." Let that sink in for a second. This verse doesn't say go out and attack people for having different beliefs. It doesn't say judge, mock, or dismiss. It says be respectful, be gracious, speak kindly, and even when you disagree, do it with dignity. Now I know people might say, well, that's just a verse. Does it really play out in practice? Yes, it does. And historically it did. Let's rewind to the time of the Prophet Muhammad himself. There's a moment that speaks volume. A Christian delegation from Najran, a town in what's now Saudi Arabia, visited the Prophet in Medina. They talked, they debated, they discussed theology. And when it came time for them to pray, do you know what the Prophet did? He let them pray in his mosque. Think about that. He didn't stop them. He didn't tell them to leave. He opened the door. He shared his space. That one act, opening the most sacred space in the city to a group of people who had different beliefs, says more about Islam's approach to interfaith respect than 1,000 books. And it doesn't stop there. The Prophet issued something called the Charter of Najran, a document that protected the rights of Christians. It guaranteed their churches would not be destroyed, their crosses would not be taken down, and their clergy would not be harmed. It even stated that Muslims must help repair churches if needed. That's not just tolerance, that's active protection, that's alliance. You see, when you study the actual teachings of Islam, and not just the headlines or hearsay, you find something deep. You find that Christianity isn't viewed as the enemy. It's viewed as family, not identical, but connected. Not the same path, but the same direction. So when people paint this picture of Islam being anti-Christian, they're not just wrong, they're uninformed. The Quran doesn't say Christians are infidels. It says they're people of scripture. It commands Muslims to treat them with grace, especially when in dialogue. And it reminds everyone that God in the end is one. That's the foundation. That's the truth. And if more people knew it, we'd be having a very different kind of conversation in the world right now. Let's talk about something that's been misunderstood for far too long, something that could completely shift the way you view the relationship between Islam and Christianity. Here it is. Muslims and Christians believe in the same God. Yes, I said it. Not a similar God. Not a different regional version. The same God, the God of Abraham, the Creator, the one who revealed scriptures to prophets throughout history. Now, does that mean Islam and Christianity are the same? Of course not. There are deep theological differences. No one's denying that. But at the core, at the heart of both faiths, is a belief in one singular sovereign God who is behind everything in the universe. Let's break it down. When a Muslim says Allah, a lot of people think it's some foreign deity, like Allah is a separate God exclusive to Islam. But that's not true. Allah is simply the Arabic word for God. And here's something most people don't realize. Arabic-speaking Christians also use the word Allah when referring to God. Go into a church in Lebanon or Egypt, and you'll hear Christian prayers with the name Allah, just like in a mosque. Why? Because the word Allah predates Islam. It was used by Arab Christians and Jews before the time of the Prophet Muhammad. It doesn't belong to any one religion. It refers to the same monotheistic creator. Now let's go to the Quran. In chapter 3 verse 64 it says, "Say, O people of the book, come to a common word between us and you, that we will worship none but God." That's a direct invitation to focus on what unites rather than what divides. What's the common word? That there is only one God, and He alone deserves worship. Here's another verse, Quran 29:46. Our God and your God is one, and to Him we submit. If you think about it, that's a bold statement. It's not trying to cancel out Christianity. It's saying, look, we may disagree about certain things like the nature of Jesus, or how salvation works, but let's not forget that we both believe in the same foundational truth. There is one God above all. Now here's where it gets even more powerful. Both religions affirm the same major prophets: Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and yes, Jesus. They might differ on roles or status, but the line of prophets is shared. It's a spiritual family tree. And who are they all pointing to? The one single divine creator. You see, this isn't about pretending our differences don't matter. It's about being honest about what's shared. And that shared belief in God is not small, it's massive. It means we're not strangers spiritually, we're neighbors, we're cousins, we're people standing on different floors of the same building, looking up at the same sky. Theologically, yes, Muslims reject the Trinity. Yes, they don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. That's real and we don't sugarcoat it. But even with those differences, Islam doesn't paint Christianity as polytheistic. Instead, it repeatedly reminds believers that Christians are part of a larger story about faith in one divine creator. And let me be super clear, this kind of understanding doesn't mean you need to convert or agree or compromise your own beliefs. That's not the point. The point is to see where the bridge already exists, and it's been there all along, built on belief in the same God. Once you realize that, it changes how you talk to people. It changes how you listen, and it definitely changes how you judge. Because at the end of the day, it's not about proving who's right. It's about recognizing that maybe, just maybe, we've all been standing closer together than we thought. If there's one thing that surprises people the most when they learn about Islam, it's this: Muslims believe in Jesus. Not kinda, not symbolically. They really believe in Him. He's not ignored. He's not dismissed. He's actually one of the most important figures in the entire religion. Let me walk you through it. In Islam, Jesus, or Isa in Arabic, is considered one of the greatest prophets ever sent by God. Not just another name in the list. He's elite. He's right up there with Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad. He's mentioned by name in the Quran more than the Prophet Muhammad himself. That's how central he is. Now here's where it gets even more fascinating. Muslims believe Jesus was born to the Virgin Mary, Maryam. They believe she was chosen, pure and honored above all women. There's even an entire chapter in the Quran named after her, Surah Maryam. Not a symbolic shout-out, a full chapter. No other woman, not even the mothers or wives of the Prophet Muhammad, gets that level of spotlight. In Islam, the birth of Jesus is described as a miracle. No earthly father, just Mary, alone, giving birth through divine intervention. Sound familiar? Because it's the same miraculous birth story told in the Bible. No compromise. That part of the story, Muslims are right there with it. And it doesn't stop there. Muslims believe Jesus performed miracles, real ones, healing the blind, curing lepers, breathing life into clay birds, raising the dead with God's permission. That's important. In Islam, every miracle Jesus did was a sign from God, not because Jesus was divine himself, but because he was a chosen messenger empowered by God. That's the key difference. Muslims don't believe Jesus is God or the Son of God. They believe he was a messenger of God, a human being, but with a sacred mission, just like Moses, just like Muhammad, just like all the other prophets. In Islam, God is not divided into parts. God is one, and only one. So calling Jesus divine, that's where Islam draws the line. But rejecting him, absolutely not. And here's something that blows people's minds. Muslims believe that Jesus didn't die on the cross. They believe he was raised up by God, saved, and that he will return at the end of time. That's right, Muslims are waiting for Jesus to come back, not as a new prophet, not with a new book, but to set things right, to bring justice, to unite the people. That's in Islamic theology, it's part of the big picture. So if you step back for a second, here's what you've got. A religion that believes in Jesus' miraculous birth, his prophetic mission, his powerful miracles, and even his second coming. That's not someone Islam is brushing aside, that's someone it's holding in the highest esteem. And what does that mean for you, for all of us? It means this massive wall people think exists between Muslims and Christians. It's not as tall as we were told, because Jesus is already standing on both sides of it. Different views, but a shared reverence. Absolute. That common ground is powerful, and if more people realized it really took the time to study what Islam actually says, we'd be having more honest conversations, less fear and a whole lot more respect. Jesus isn't a dividing line. In many ways he's a bridge. Let's get real about something. There's a massive misconception floating around that Islam is all about forcing people to believe, convert, or conform, that it's a faith built on pressure and domination, that if you're not Muslim, you're automatically an enemy. That's the story people have been sold, but the truth, it couldn't be more different. One of the clearest, most powerful verses in the Quran says this: "Let there be no compulsion in religion." Quran 2:20 facts. Let's say that again because it's not just a nice phrase, it's a principle too. Compulsion. In religion, that means faith cannot be forced. Belief doesn't count if it comes from fear, pressure, or manipulation. In Islam, if you choose to believe, it has to come from the heart, your own choice, not someone else's control. That alone flips a lot of stereotypes on their heads. Islam is very clear. God gave human beings free will. That's not a loophole, that's by design. Everyone is responsible for their own soul. You can't shove faith into someone, you can't argue them into paradise. The Prophet Muhammad himself was told by God in the Quran, "You are not a controller over them." Quran 88:22. Think about that. The Prophet, the leader of the Muslim community, was told that he couldn't force people to believe, that his job was to convey the message, not control hearts. That's the model Islam sets. And if he wasn't allowed to force belief, who is? This goes even deeper. Islam actually acknowledges that people will always be different, different faiths, different backgrounds, different beliefs, and it doesn't view that as a flaw, it views it as part of God's plan. The Quran says, if your Lord had willed, all people on earth would have believed, so will you then force people to become believers? Quran 10:99. That's a rhetorical question. The answer is clearly no. And yet people look at headlines or extremists and assume that's what Islam teaches. But those headlines, they don't reflect the religion. They reflect what happens when people ignore the very teachings of their own faith. There's another verse, Quran 5:8, and this one's key. It says, "Do not let hatred of a people prevent you from being just. Be just." That is closer to righteousness. That's not just about law. That's about human behavior, about how you treat people even if they disagree with you, even if they reject your belief. Islam doesn't give you permission to dehumanize anyone. It commands fairness, even when it's uncomfortable. Let's be clear. Islam doesn't say all religions are the same. It doesn't pretend all beliefs lead to the same place, but it does say that belief must be chosen, not imposed. And it says that living alongside others, people of different faiths, no faith at all, is part of the human experience. You can be proud of your faith without being hateful. You can disagree without being disrespectful. You can preach without force. And here's the truth. If your belief is so fragile that it needs to be protected by fear or violence, it was never belief in the first place. It was insecurity dressed up as religion. So when Islam says no compulsion in religion, it's not just laying down a rule. It's building the foundation for how people of different paths can share the same world. It's not about converting the planet. It's about building a world where belief is real, not because someone shouted it at you, but because you searched, you questioned, and you chose. That's not weakness, that's strength, that's Islam. Let's clear something up that a lot of people have never even heard. The Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam, the most influential figure in Muslim history, didn't just tolerate Christians, he protected them, he honored them. He literally put it in writing that they were to be treated with dignity, respect, and kindness. This isn't some modern PR strategy, this is rooted in actual history, In the 7th century, during the Prophet's lifetime, Christian communities lived all across Arabia. One of the most famous interactions happened with a group of Christians from Najran, a town in present-day Saudi Arabia. These weren't just casual visitors, they were a delegation of priests and leaders. They came to Medina to meet the Prophet, to discuss theology, real talk about who Jesus is, what Christians believe and how that lines up or clashes with Islam. Now here's the kicker, when it came time for them to pray, the Prophet let them pray in his mosque, the holiest place for Muslims in the city, and instead of saying no, this is a Muslim-only space, he said, go ahead. He honored their worship, even if he didn't agree with every detail of their belief. That's leadership, that's humanity, and that's Islam in practice. But it goes deeper. After this meeting, the Prophet Muhammad issued a formal document, something known historically as the Charter of Najran, and it wasn't just a friendly gesture, it was a declaration of rights and protection. In this charter, the Prophet promised that Christians would have full protection of their lives, property and places of worship, freedom to practice their religion without interference, the right to be protected by Muslims including military protection if needed, assurance that no church would be demolished and no cross taken down. It even goes as far as saying, if a Christian community needed help repairing a church, Muslims should help them. This wasn't just tolerance, this was active responsibility. Imagine that today, a leader saying, your church is sacred to you so it's sacred to us too. We'll defend it, we'll help maintain it, we'll make sure you're safe in it. That's a level of interfaith respect that most people would never expect from a 7th century. And yet here it is, not from some fringe figure but from the Prophet of Islam himself. Now someone might say, that was then, what about now? And yeah, history has had dark chapters. No religion's followers have a perfect record. But the issue is not the scripture or the Prophet's example, it's when people stop following it. Because if Muslims today were to fully live by the Prophet's approach, churches would never be burned, Christians would never be attacked in the name of Islam. They would be respected neighbors, not enemies. That's the blueprint the Prophet left behind. He made it clear, belief and disagreement are not excuses for cruelty. You can have different theology and still protect each other. You can pray in different ways and still live in peace. And you can follow your own faith without threatening someone else's. The Prophet didn't just say be kind, he created policies for it. He didn't just preach peace, he wrote it into law. And he didn't just tolerate Christians, he honored them as people of the. That's the part of Islamic history we need to talk about more, because it's not about hiding differences, it's about leading with humanity. And if he could do it then, we sure as hell can do it now. If you really want to understand the heart of what Islam says about Christians, there's one area you absolutely cannot ignore, and that's how the Quran teaches Muslims to talk to them. Not fight, not shame, talk, respectfully, calmly, intelligent. Now that's not just me saying let's all be nice and get along. This is literally commanded in the Quran, not suggested, not encouraged, commanded. Let me give it to you straight from the Surah. In Surah Al-Ankabut, chapter 29 verse 46, the Quran says, and do not argue with the people of the book except in the best manner, unless it be with those who act unjustly, and say, we believe in what was revealed to us and what was revealed to you. Our God and your God is one, and to him we submit. Let's unpack that. People of the book, that's referring to Jews and Christians, the communities who received earlier scriptures, before the Quran. And what does Islam tell Muslims to do? Don't argue harshly, don't debate to dominate, talk with grace, use the best, most respectful approach. You hear that and it changes the tone completely. It's not about crushing someone's beliefs, it's not about winning a religious argument, it's about connecting, about listening, about engaging with the best of what you have, your mind and your manners. And the verse goes even deeper. It actually says, our God and your God is one. That's not something you say if you're trying to divide people. That's something you say when you're trying to build a bridge. Here's the truth. Most people don't realize. Islam acknowledges that Christians are sincere in their faith. The Quran says, Christians are among those closest in affection to Muslims. Quran 5:82. Because they are not arrogant. It praises their humility, their devotion and their compassion. That doesn't mean Islam agrees with everything Christians believe, but it does mean the Quran sees value in the way many Christians live their faith, with love, service and sincerity. And that's the model Muslims are supposed to follow when engaging with Christians. Recognize what's good, speak with honor, find the common ground and build from there. Let me be real with you. In today's world, when people talk about religion, it often turns toxic. Social media arguments, shouting matches on cable news, people trying to prove everyone else wrong. It's exhausting. And honestly, it's pointless, because nobody changes their heart when they feel attacked. But you know what does move people? Respect, curiosity, honest conversation, and that's what the Quran is pointing toward. It's not telling Muslims to water down their belief. It's not saying pretend we all believe the same thing. No, it's saying have the courage to speak with character, to disagree without demeaning, to listen without judging, to represent your faith with the kind of dignity that invites real dialogue. This isn't a modern Western idea of interfaith talk. This is built into the DNA of Islam. This is scripture. This is prophetic tradition. And if more people, Muslim and non-Muslim, actually knew this, maybe we'd stop yelling over each other and start talking to each other. Because in the end, this isn't just about theology. It's about how we live, how we treat our neighbors, how we build a world where differences don't lead to destruction, but to deeper understanding. So the next time someone tells you Islam is about division or conflict, remember this. The Quran literally teaches Muslims to speak to Christians with the best words they've got, not because we're the same, but because we're human, and that's where all real conversations should start. So here's the truth. The one no one talks about at dinner tables or headlines or internet comment sections. Islam does not teach Muslims to hate Christians. In fact, it teaches the opposite. It honors the shared roots between us. It lifts up Jesus, not quietly, but boldly. It commands freedom of belief, not force. It records the Prophet Muhammad himself standing up for Christian safety, and it commands Muslims to speak with respect, not rage. We've been told a story, one of division, suspicion, but that story falls apart the minute you actually open the Quran, the minute you look at the Prophet's actions, the minute you have one honest conversation with a Muslim who actually lives their faith. And look, we don't have to agree on everything. We don't have to merge beliefs or blur identities, but we do need to show up with curiosity, not contempt, with clarity, not hate, because the more you actually learn, the harder it is to hold on to prejudice. The problem isn't faith, it's ignorance, and ignorance is optional. So if you take one thing from this, let it be this. You cannot hate someone you truly understand. Islam doesn't see Christians as enemies. It sees them as fellow travelers, people of the book, human beings made by the same creator. We can disagree and still stand together in dignity. We can worship differently and still walk side by side in peace. That's not weakness. That's not compromise. That's wisdom. That's strength. That's